program, we're going to be looking at some different aspects of sexual health, including human papillomavirus, contraception, relationship violence, gender and sexuality, and how we can better promote sexual health. Sexual health, we always hear the term, but what does it actually mean? The World Health Organization defines sexual health as a state of physical, mental and social well-being in relation to sexuality. It requires a positive and respectful approach to sexuality and sexual relationships, as well as the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences, free of coercion, discrimination and violence. To 80% of people, male and female, will be infected with some type of genital human papillomavirus, HPV, at some time in their life. It can be caused by any sexual activity involving genital contact. It's often harmless and asymptomatic, but in some cases can lead to diseases such as cancers of the vulva, vagina and anus, and genital warts. Genital HPV types may be categorised as high risk or low risk. High risk HPV types are the ones that can cause cervical, vaginal, vulval and anal cancers, whereas low-risk HPV types can cause genital warts. Barrier methods of birth control block sperm from entering the uterus. The only of these methods which prevents STIs and STDs from occurring are the male and female condoms. Condoms are highly effective in preventing contraction of STDs. The rate of condom breakage or slippage during sexual intercourse is 0.4 to 2%. Even if broken, a condom is still better than unprotected sex. Bear in mind that the only 100% effective form of contraception is abstinence. Condoms are less effective against HPV than they are against other STDs. When an STD is spread by a sore or ulcer, a condom will only be effective if it is actually covering the sore or ulcer. When sexual partners fail to use a condom during sexual intercourse, they are not protected from contraction of STDs, and their chances of being infected are incredibly higher. Ineffective use of condoms may also result in contraction of STDs. If a condom is not used correctly, it may become more prone to breaking or slipping off, leading to the potential for STD contraction. Many people will suffer STDs because they were not educated on what they are and how they can be prevented. Information on prevention of STDs are becoming more readily available as society begins to realise the severity of the issue. It's taught to children and teenagers in school from a young age. A pap smear is a quick and simple test for changes in the cervix cells, which could lead to cervical cancer. A sample of cells from the cervix are taken and smeared on a glass slide, and within a week, results are returned. Both high-risk and low-risk HPV types can cause abnormal pap smear results. I personally feel that the whole of Australia can better promote good sexual health by advancement of education around the topic, not only in schools, but also for adults. While Australia is progressing towards better promotion of sexual health in the education system, there are still gaps. Unfortunately, the generations before us did not have access to such extensive education on sexual health. Therefore, I feel that Australia should utilise more extensive and accessible education services for older Australians.
Hi, and now we're going to be talking about domestic violence, relationship abuse and gender inequality. In 2014, White Ribbon Australia came up with a definition around domestic violence, and that refers to violence, abuse, intimidation between people who are or have been in an intimate relationship. The perpetrator uses violence to control and dominate the other person. And I just wanted to bring up some key words with a focus on the violence, abuse and intimidation, and then the control and dominate. I want you to have a think about those key words, and we're going to come back to some of those later on down the track. But I want you to start thinking and moving away from the idea of violence being just physical. But overall, I think the limitations to the definition, I think that there is limitations to the definition, as I think there's a high number of family violence situations where the perpetrator might be a son, or it might be an uncle or another member of the family that commits the violence towards, say, a mother or a sister. And I don't believe that that definition is completely appropriate for all situations in domestic violence. As well as domestic violence, relationship abuse and family violence, one other term that is often used is unhealthy relationships. This is probably used more around education within high schools, and there's a strong focus on healthy and unhealthy relationships with young people. So there's probably the focus on the unhealthy relationships. It's probably focused on the early stages of an abusive relationship, or the learning of how to become aware of what is and what isn't a healthy relationship. So these are the risk factors, and these are for relationship abuse and domestic violence of both perpetrators and victims. So at the top there we've got young people, and there's a reason why young people are at the top, and that's because young women have the highest rate of falling victim to physical or sexual violence than any other age bracket, and it probably hasn't been marketed that well from domestic violence advocacy groups, because there's probably a bigger focus on middle-aged men and women. Then we've got alcohol and drugs, history of childhood abuse, living in rural areas, Indigenous backgrounds, cultural and linguistically diverse backgrounds, people living with disability, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex and queer backgrounds. That's an issue for people that in that category, and also is a key risk factor is people that might have poor gender equality attitudes. One risk factor that's not on there is low socioeconomic background, so that's another risk factor for family violence. So some of the statistics are quite staggering around domestic violence. 1 in 3 women have experienced physical and or sexual violence perpetrated by someone they know to them. 1 in 5 women over 18 have been stalked during their lifetime. Also 1 in 5 women experience harassment within the workplace. Over 12 months, on average, 1 woman is killed every week by a current or former partner. Domestic violence is the principal cause of homelessness for women and their children. That was one that we had on a slide just before. Indigenous women and girls are 35 times more likely than the wider female population to be hospitalised due to family violence. So that's a ginormous one, that one. And in Australia, 1 in 4 children are exposed to domestic violence. And that's one thing that is very rarely talked about within domestic violence within the community. When people are talking about domestic violence, very rarely are children acknowledged as a victim in these circumstances. So here we've got the wheel of power and control, and that is central to domestic violence. That is what the perpetrator is trying to achieve from acting out and doing all the things that he does, or she. And so at the top you'll see the first one, which is using intimidation. So that could be all of those things there. And then you come across to using emotional abuse. So a lot of that is around put downs, humiliation, isolating the victim, so making sure that he or she is not able to see their friends and family. And then the next one over is minimising and denying and blaming. So this one is often about pretending that things didn't happen. The perpetrator may make out that things are much better than they seem with friends and family and that sort of thing as well. The next one over is using children to gain control, and that one might be about threatening the children. It might be about threatening to take children away. It might be threatening to hurt the kids. One of the other things with that, it could be if there's no children in the house, it could be about using pets. And then you've got male privilege, and I'm probably going to talk a bit more about that in the next slide, but I think that's an important one also. There's also financial abuse. That might be about making sure that the victim isn't able to do all the things that they'd like to do in their life. They might give them limited amounts of finance to be able to do the shopping for the family, and that's it. So I guess that's another form of emotional abuse as well. And then there's also coercion and threats, and that's around the many different types of threats that a perpetrator could make to a victim. So there are, as I was saying earlier, there is the types of ways that domestic violence relationships may unfold, and it's not always violence, but many times it's all of those things, or many of those things, and that's why it's so important to make sure that we're not just talking about the physical violence or the sexual violence, but many of those different aspects. And just to finish up, I'm going to be talking about the gender inequalities within Australia, and I think that it's so important, if we're going to counter violence towards women, is that we start to challenge the balance of power in the community between men and women. And I think that starts from a young age. It needs to be something that's talked about in children from the very beginning, but it's also a really challenging issue to tackle when you've got children being advertised to in with toys that are very much focused on princesses and superheroes, and the very typical gender roles is at play at such an early age. It's one of the issues that I have with the idea of White Ribbon Day, and they've done some very important work in terms of bringing domestic violence to the mainstream community. But the idea of, with the focus being on men countering domestic violence, I think there needs to be a holistic approach between men and women working in partnership to remove domestic violence from the community. I think that's men sitting in boardrooms within companies talking about violence towards women is the exact thing that is not equal within the community, that it's really important that we have equal amount of men and women sitting around a table discussing these issues. One of the other main things, which is a huge problem within Australia, is a lack of services available, and that is concerning from all areas in terms of lack of counselling, the lack of support from the law, the lack of housing opportunities, people that are homeless, the lack of early intervention programs, especially for perpetrators, and then also that there isn't a evidence-based education program for children and high school students around what is the best practice for tackling these issues within the learning environment. Thanks for your time. We hope this was a valuable learning experience for you, and if you want to find out more around sexual health, check out our references.